Plato's legacy is a cornerstone of Western thought, profoundly shaping the course of philosophy, politics, ethics, and even science. Although over 2 millennia have passed since his death, his philosophical contributions remain central to how we think about society, morality, and the pursuit of knowledge. One of the most compelling aspects of Plato's philosophy is its universal appeal, with ideas that transcend the boundaries of time, place, and culture. These ideas have influenced not only philosophers and political theorists, but also have shaped the thinking of world leaders and thinkers from the Renaissance to modern times. At the heart of Plato's philosophy is his theory of the forms, which posits that the material world we perceive with our senses is merely an imperfect reflection of a higher, eternal, and unchanging reality. This notion of an ideal realm, separate from the physical world, is not only a metaphysical claim but also a moral and ethical framework that underpins much of Plato's thinking. Plato believed that true knowledge and understanding could only be achieved by contemplating these abstract forms, and that the physical world, with its imperfections, is but a fleeting shadow of the ideal. In a world where everything seems in flux, where ideas about morality, justice, and truth are often subjective, Plato's insistence on the existence of eternal, unchanging forms provides a stabilizing foundation for knowledge and values. One of the most famous aspects of Plato's philosophy is his tripartite theory of the soul, which divides the human soul into 3 parts: the rational, the spirited, and the appetitive. Plato argued that justice within the individual arises when these parts of the soul are in harmony. Reason must rule over spirit and appetite, which, in turn, leads to a just life. This idea of harmony extends into his conception of the ideal state, as outlined in works like The Republic, where the state mirrors the soul. In an ideal state, the rulers, or philosopher-kings, embody wisdom and reason, while soldiers, or guardians, embody courage, and workers, or producers, embody moderation. For Plato, justice is achieved when each part of society fulfills its role, much like the soul achieves justice when each part performs its proper function. What is particularly fascinating about Plato's political philosophy is his critique of democracy. While Plato's ideal state is governed by philosopher-kings who possess wisdom and knowledge, he was deeply skeptical of democracy, which he saw as a system in which the masses, driven by emotion, ignorance, and appetites, could easily be manipulated by demagogues. Plato argued that democracy, with its emphasis on individual freedoms and equality, ultimately degenerates into tyranny when the people elect leaders who pander to their baser instincts. In this way, Plato's criticism of democracy resonates with many of the debates in modern political theory. For example, in today's world, we often see how charismatic populist leaders exploit the emotions of the electorate, promising simple solutions to complex problems. Plato's warning about the dangers of mob rule remains relevant in discussions of political systems worldwide. Despite his distrust of democracy, Plato believed that the state must be structured in a way that allows individuals to achieve eudaimonia, a Greek word often translated as flourishing or the good life. Plato's concept of the good life is closely tied to virtue and wisdom. In his ideal society, the philosopher-king rules with reason, aiming to ensure that each individual is able to live a virtuous life and contribute to the common good. This idea of the philosopher-king as a wise and just ruler has remained influential throughout history. For example, Nelson Mandela, one of the most revered political figures in modern history, embodied aspects of Plato's philosopher-king. Mandela's leadership was characterized by his wisdom, patience, and moral integrity, as well as his ability to guide South Africa through its transition from apartheid to democracy. Although not a philosopher in the traditional sense, Mandela's actions often reflected the kind of leadership that Plato envisioned. In addition to politics, Plato's philosophy has had a lasting impact on ethics and moral theory. Central to Plato's ethics is the idea that virtue is the path to the good life, and that knowledge of the forms, particularly the form of the good, is essential for achieving moral excellence. This idea resonates with modern ethical theories, particularly those that emphasize the cultivation of virtue. For instance, Aristotle, Plato's student, expanded on this ethical framework in his Nicomachean Ethics, arguing that virtue is a mean between extremes, and that the pursuit of happiness, or eudaimonia, is the highest good. While Aristotle's ethical theory differs from Plato's in significant ways, particularly in his rejection of Plato's theory of forms, both philosophers shared a commitment to the idea that human flourishing is linked to virtue. Plato's influence can also be seen in the development of education. His creation of the academy, the first institution of higher learning in Western history, was a groundbreaking moment in the intellectual history of the ancient world. The academy became a center for the study of philosophy, science, mathematics, and politics, and its model has influenced educational systems ever since. In modern times, universities still embrace the spirit of Plato's academy, fostering intellectual inquiry and debate across disciplines. The academy's focus on reason and intellectual rigor, along with its emphasis on the pursuit of truth, has shaped how we approach education today. Even in the age of technology and innovation, Plato's belief that education should be focused on developing the mind and nurturing intellectual virtues remains central to our educational values. Plato's theory of knowledge, particularly his epistemology, is also one of his most significant contributions. In works like Theaetetus, Plato explores the nature of knowledge, arguing that knowledge is not merely a matter of sensory perception, but of understanding the eternal forms. For Plato, knowledge and belief are distinct. Knowledge is always true and eternal, whereas belief is contingent upon the world of appearances, which is constantly changing. This distinction between knowledge and belief has had a profound impact on the way philosophers and scientists think about truth and evidence. In the field of science, for example, the distinction between empirical observation, belief, and theoretical understanding, knowledge, mirrors Plato's view of the world of appearances versus the world of eternal truths. This epistemological framework has influenced everything from the scientific method to mathematics, where abstract concepts often transcend the physical world. Plato's belief in the power of reason and intellect to access deeper truths laid the foundation for subsequent developments in philosophy and science. However, Plato's work has not been without critique. Many philosophers, most notably Aristotle, challenged his metaphysical and epistemological claims. Aristotle rejected Plato's theory of the forms, arguing that forms cannot exist independently of physical objects. Instead, Aristotle proposed a more empirical approach to understanding reality, focusing on the observation of the natural world and the study of concrete particulars. Despite this divergence, Aristotle's work, like Plato's, laid the groundwork for much of Western philosophy, and both thinkers remain foundational figures in the history of thought. Moreover, Plato's ideas have not only influenced Western thought, but also had a significant impact on Islamic philosophy during the Golden Age. Thinkers like Al-Farabi, Avicenna, and Averroes engaged with Platonic ideas, particularly his theories of knowledge, virtue, and the soul. These philosophers integrated Plato's ideas into their own philosophical systems, blending them with Islamic theology and logic. This cross-cultural exchange demonstrates the universal nature of Plato's ideas and their relevance beyond the confines of the Western tradition. In the Renaissance, thinkers like Marsilio Ficino and Giovanni Pico della Mirandola revived Platonic ideas, particularly his emphasis on the immortality of the soul and the pursuit of virtue. These thinkers saw in Plato's philosophy a way to reconcile classical knowledge with Christian doctrine, influencing the intellectual culture of the period and contributing to the humanist movement. Plato's impact on the arts is equally profound. His writings, particularly in the form of dialogues, blend philosophical inquiry with literary artistry. The characters in his dialogues, especially Socrates, have inspired countless playwrights, poets, and novelists throughout history. The dramatic form of Plato's works, using dialogue to explore complex philosophical questions, has influenced the development of narrative structures in literature. Even today, the themes of truth, justice, beauty, and virtue explored in Plato's dialogues continue to inspire works of art and literature. Ultimately, Plato's legacy is not confined to a particular period or place. His ideas have had a profound influence on Western civilization, shaping everything from politics and ethics to education and science. His works continue to challenge and inspire thinkers, leaders, and scholars today, as his philosophical system remains a vital source of reflection on the nature of knowledge, the good life, and the ideal society. Whether we look at modern political debates, educational reform, or the pursuit of knowledge, Plato's ideas remain deeply embedded in our intellectual and cultural traditions, proving that the questions he raised millennia ago are still incredibly relevant to our world today. Plato's influence on philosophy is undeniably monumental, and his relationship with his most famous student, Aristotle, provides a vivid snapshot of how intellectual traditions evolve through debate, disagreement, and innovation. The teacher-student dynamic between Plato and Aristotle highlights a fascinating philosophical rift that continues to echo in the world today. Plato's idealism, with its emphasis on abstract, unchanging forms, was sharply contrasted by Aristotle's more empirical approach, which focused on observing the physical world and drawing conclusions based on experience. This divergence created the foundation for two distinct schools of thought, Platonism and Aristotelianism, each of which has left an indelible mark on the history of Western philosophy. Plato, one of the most influential figures in Western philosophy, proposed a metaphysical system that revolved around his theory of the forms. According to Plato, the material world we perceive with our senses is merely a shadow of a higher, immutable reality. The forms are perfect, eternal, and unchanging concepts or ideals that exist independently of the physical world. For instance, the form of beauty exists as a perfect, unalterable standard of beauty, while all beautiful things in the physical world are mere approximations of this ideal. Plato's emphasis on these abstract, transcendent realities provided the foundation for his epistemology and ethics, suggesting that true knowledge could only be obtained through intellectual contemplation of these forms. Plato's philosophy was revolutionary, not only because of its metaphysical claims, but also because of the way it treated knowledge as something beyond sensory experience. Plato argued that reason, rather than the senses, should be the primary tool for acquiring knowledge, and this belief has profoundly influenced the course of Western thought. He established the Academy in Athens, one of the first institutions of higher learning, to advance this kind of philosophical inquiry. In many ways, Plato's theory of forms has influenced how we think about the nature of truth, knowledge, and ethics, laying the groundwork for countless later philosophical movements. However, it was his student Aristotle who would ultimately challenge Plato's ideas and reshape much of Western thought. Aristotle studied under Plato for 20 years at the Academy, absorbing the lessons of his teacher, but eventually departing from Plato's doctrines in several key areas. Most notably, Aristotle rejected Plato's theory of the forms, arguing that knowledge must be grounded in the material world, not in some abstract, unchanging reality. For Aristotle, the key to understanding the world was not through contemplating eternal forms, but through observing and studying the physical world around us. Aristotle's emphasis on empiricism, the idea that knowledge comes from sensory experience, laid the foundation for much of modern science. The philosophical divide between Plato and Aristotle, idealism versus empiricism, can be seen as one of the most important developments in the history of Western thought. Plato's idealism suggested that the realm of ideas was the true source of knowledge, and that the material world was of secondary importance. For Aristotle, on the other hand, empiricism was the key to understanding reality, as he believed that knowledge comes from interacting with and observing the material world. While Plato saw the highest form of knowledge as an intellectual pursuit, Aristotle grounded knowledge in practical experience and observation. This distinction between Plato and Aristotle's approaches is not merely an abstract debate about the nature of knowledge. It has real-world implications. For instance, in today's classrooms, this tension between theory and practice remains relevant. Teachers, like Plato, might guide students to explore abstract concepts, such as philosophical principles or ethical ideals. Yet, as students grow and gain experience, they may challenge these ideas based on their real-world encounters. This dynamic is particularly evident in fields such as science, where theoretical models are often tested and refined through hands-on experimentation. The same tension exists in fields like politics, where philosophical ideals about justice or governance clash with the practical realities of governance and power. Consider, for example, the contrast between the political philosophies of Plato and Aristotle. In his work The Republic, Plato outlines his vision of an ideal state, where philosopher-kings rule based on wisdom and rationality. Plato argues that a just society is one where rulers, educated in philosophy, govern for the common good. He is deeply skeptical of democracy, fearing that the masses, driven by irrational desires and ignorance, would ultimately elect bad leaders who would undermine the common good. Plato's idealism, his belief that governance should be based on abstract ideals of justice and virtue, has inspired political philosophers and theorists throughout history, but it has also drawn criticism for being impractical, even authoritarian. Aristotle, however, takes a far more empirical and pragmatic approach to politics in his work Politics. Rather than advocating for a philosopher-king, Aristotle analyzes different forms of government, such as monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy, and assesses their strengths and weaknesses. For Aristotle, the best form of government depends on the specific context and circumstances of a society. Aristotle's approach is grounded in the practical realities of governance, emphasizing moderation, law, and the rule of law over idealistic notions of justice. This more empirical approach to politics is arguably more suited to contemporary democratic systems, where the practicalities of governance, such as power structures, human nature, and the distribution of wealth, must be accounted for. When we think about modern political figures who exemplify this tension between idealism and pragmatism, Nelson Mandela comes to mind, a leader who fought for the ideal of equality and justice. Mandela's actions were shaped by a blend of philosophical ideals and a pragmatic understanding of the complex, divided society he sought to heal. In his leadership of South Africa, Mandela balanced his ideals of justice with the practical need for reconciliation and stability. His pragmatism in the face of a polarized society echoes Aristotle's empiricist approach to governance. Political leaders must understand the material realities of their world and craft solutions based on those truths, rather than relying solely on abstract ideals. In contrast, Plato's idealism can still be seen in the thinking of some contemporary leaders and philosophers. For example, Barack Obama often spoke of an idealistic vision of unity and progress. Obama's speeches frequently invoked lofty ideals about justice, equality, and the common good. While he certainly dealt with the practicalities of governance, his political philosophy was often rooted in the belief that politics could elevate the human condition and bring about a more perfect union. While some of his critics would argue that his idealism sometimes clashed with the practicalities of running a country, Obama's leadership reflected a kind of Platonic aspiration toward creating a better, more just society, even when the practical challenges seemed overwhelming. The divide between Plato's idealism and Aristotle's empiricism is not merely a historical curiosity. It continues to shape our approach to politics, education, and science today. The idealism of Plato has influenced utopian thinkers, while Aristotle's empiricism has laid the groundwork for the scientific method and empirical research. Both approaches have their strengths and weaknesses, and the tension between the two often gives rise to more balanced, nuanced thinking in various fields. In the field of science, this tension is especially evident. Plato's influence can be seen in the emphasis on mathematics and abstract reasoning that has shaped fields such as theoretical physics and astronomy. Plato believed that the universe was governed by mathematical principles, and he saw mathematics as a means to access higher truths. This idea laid the groundwork for later developments in quantum mechanics and general relativity, where theoretical models often precede empirical observation. However, Aristotle's approach, which emphasizes empirical observation and the study of concrete particulars, has been equally influential. particularly in the development of the scientific method. Scientists like Isaac Newton, Charles Darwin, and Galileo Galilei adhered to an empirical approach, collecting data, conducting experiments, and forming conclusions based on sensory experience and observation. The tension between theoretical models and empirical testing is at the heart of scientific inquiry, and it reflects the long-standing philosophical debate between Plato's idealism and Aristotle's empiricism. In education, Plato's emphasis on the intellectual development of the individual and the pursuit of knowledge through reason has profoundly shaped Western educational systems. Plato's Academy was an early institution designed to promote philosophical inquiry and intellectual growth. His ideas about the importance of education in shaping the soul have influenced modern theories of education, where the goal is often not just to impart facts, but to cultivate the mind and character of students. Aristotle's influence, however, is also deeply embedded in educational philosophy, particularly in his belief that learning should be grounded in experience. Aristotle's focus on practical knowledge and his conviction that virtue arises through habituation has shaped how we approach education today, particularly in the context of vocational training and applied sciences. Aristotle would argue that education should not only prepare individuals to be abstract thinkers, but also equip them with the practical skills needed to navigate the challenges of life. In conclusion, the legacy of Plato and Aristotle is intertwined in ways that continue to shape the intellectual landscape of the modern world. Their contrasting views on knowledge, ethics, politics, and education have provided the foundation for much of Western thought. Plato's idealism, with its emphasis on abstract truth and the pursuit of the perfect society, continues to inspire visionaries and theorists. Aristotle's empiricism, grounded in observation and experience, has shaped the development of science, politics, and education, offering practical frameworks for understanding the world. Together, the philosophies of Plato and Aristotle form the bedrock of Western intellectual tradition, each offering valuable insights into the nature of knowledge and the human experience. Plato's philosophy presents a profound exploration of the human soul and its relationship to justice, offering ideas that continue to influence moral and ethical thought today. In his works, especially in the Republic, Plato delves into the structure of the soul, the pursuit of justice, and the immortality of the soul. His conception of a harmonious soul mirrors his vision for a just society, one where each individual plays their rightful role. In this framework, reason, spirit, and appetite are not just aspects of individual psychology, but are also metaphors for the larger societal order. Plato's tripartite model of the soul divides it into three distinct parts: reason, spirit, and appetite. Reason, according to Plato, is the rational, intellectual part of the soul that seeks truth and wisdom. Spirit is the emotional, willful part of the soul that is associated with courage, ambition, and honor, while appetite represents our desires and physical needs, our cravings for food, sex, and material pleasure. In Plato's view, the soul is only truly just when these three parts are properly ordered, with reason governing the other two. The balance and harmony between these elements are key to achieving both personal and societal justice. This tripartite structure of the soul also underpins Plato's conception of justice. Just as a harmonious soul is ruled by reason, a just society is one in which the rulers, the philosopher-kings, govern with wisdom and reason, while the warrior class, spirited individuals, defends the state, and the productive class, those driven by appetite, provides for the material needs of society. Plato's ideal state is one where each class fulfills its designated role, ensuring that the whole society operates in harmony. Just as the parts of the soul must function in harmony to create a just individual. In this analogy, justice is not just a societal ideal but a personal one. Plato's view on justice provides a deep metaphor for how we should approach our inner conflicts. When reason rules our impulses and desires, we achieve not just personal peace but also a fairer society. The key to individual justice, according to Plato, lies in recognizing and nurturing the rational aspect of the self, which then governs the emotional and physical aspects of our nature. This idea is not merely an abstract philosophical claim, but has practical implications for our daily lives. The internal struggle between our impulses and reason is a constant part of the human experience. And Plato's idea of a just soul encourages us to strive for balance and harmony within ourselves. One contemporary example that resonates with Plato's philosophy is Nelson Mandela. Mandela's leadership exemplified the principle that when reason governs, the results are peace and harmony. After spending 27 years in prison, Mandela emerged not with a thirst for vengeance, but with a reasoned and compassionate approach to governance. He understood that if South Africa was to heal from the wounds of apartheid, it required not just a change in political systems, but a transformation of the collective spirit of its people. His ability to temper his personal emotions, prioritize the greater good, and act with reason made him an effective leader and a key figure in the peaceful transition from apartheid to democracy. Mandela's approach to leadership mirrors the harmony Plato envisioned between reason, spirit, and appetite, where reason's guidance fosters unity and peace in both the individual and the society. In contrast, leaders who let their appetites or emotional impulses dominate their decisions often create social unrest. Populist leaders, for example, may exploit the emotional desires of the masses, making promises based on short-term satisfaction or material gain. These leaders often appeal to the base instincts of their followers, stirring up anger, fear, or greed to rally support. While this might bring them immediate popularity or political power, it can lead to societal instability in the long run. Plato's model teaches that a just society requires individuals, including those in positions of power, to act based on reason and long-term wisdom, not impulsive desire or unchecked emotions. Beyond the structure of the soul, Plato also addresses the immortality of the soul, offering an argument that provides hope for those concerned with the afterlife and moral behavior. This belief is particularly evident in works like the Phaedo and the Republic, where Plato discusses the nature of the soul and its eternal journey. For Plato, the soul is not a transient entity that disappears with the body, but rather a timeless essence that persists beyond physical death. His argument from opposites, stating that life comes from death and death comes from life, illustrates the cyclical nature of existence and supports his claim that the soul is eternal. Just as life follows from death, and death gives way to life, the soul continues its existence in a cycle of rebirth and transformation. This view on the immortality of the soul is not just a comforting belief, but also serves as a moral framework for how we live our lives. If our actions in this life directly influence the fate of our soul in eternity, it provides an impetus to live more virtuously. Plato suggests that the soul's journey is one of purification and improvement, where virtuous actions lead to the betterment of the soul, and vice versa. The idea that the soul's state at the time of death impacts its future existence gives moral weight to every action and decision we make. If we live justly, with reason governing our impulses and desires, the soul can attain a higher state in the afterlife. This philosophical perspective also provides a lens through which we can view the modern concept of legacy. Many people today, particularly those with public recognition or political power, are deeply concerned with how they will be remembered after death. Leaders like Winston Churchill and John F. Kennedy, for example, spent their lives making decisions not only with an eye on the present, but with a strong awareness of the historical record they were creating. They sought to leave behind a legacy of strength, integrity, and leadership in times of crisis. While Plato's philosophy takes this idea further, it suggests that the legacy we leave is not just a matter of historical remembrance or public opinion, but is tied to the moral quality of our souls. In this sense, Plato's view on immortality extends the modern concept of legacy beyond mere social recognition to the spiritual continuity of the soul. It invites us to think about how our actions and choices affect the deeper, eternal part of ourselves. This concept also invites reflection on how we perceive moral consequences in modern society. For instance, figures like Barack Obama, who are often seen as moral role models, emphasize the importance of legacy and virtue. Obama, like many public figures, often spoke about how the decisions we make today shape the world for future generations. In a way, His message resonates with Plato's view of the soul and immortality. By acting with integrity and virtue today, we create a future, both for our communities and for our souls, that reflects our highest values. While his message is not explicitly about the soul's immortality, it aligns with Plato's philosophy of making moral choices that transcend the material world. On the other hand, many people today still struggle with questions about life's purpose and the consequences of their actions, especially in a world that increasingly values instant gratification over long-term goals. The modern preoccupation with success, wealth, and status can often overshadow deeper questions about the nature of the soul and the legacy one leaves behind. Plato's ideas about the immortality of the soul challenge this by urging us to think beyond our immediate desires and material gains. The soul's journey, as Plato envisions it, is one that transcends the fleeting nature of physical life and points toward a deeper, more enduring purpose, living a virtuous life, where reason governs, leads to harmony not only within oneself but also in the broader society. In conclusion, Plato's ideas on the soul and justice present a rich and complex vision of human nature and the moral order of the universe. His tripartite model of the soul emphasizes the importance of reason, spirit, and appetite in creating a just and harmonious life, both individually and collectively. Plato's belief in the immortality of the soul adds an additional layer of moral significance to our actions, suggesting that the pursuit of virtue is not only for the benefit of society, but also for the eternal fate of the soul. Whether through historical examples like Mandela's reasoned leadership or modern conceptions of legacy, Plato's ideas continue to offer insight into how we might live better, more virtuous lives, with an eye toward both the present and the future. Plato's vision of governance and the ideal state is one of the most striking aspects of his philosophy, and it reflects his broader views on justice, human nature, and the pursuit of wisdom. His concept of the philosopher-king as the ruler of the ideal state stands out as both visionary and, for some, controversial. Plato believed that in an ideal society, rulers should not be driven by ambition or personal gain, but by a deep sense of wisdom and virtue. This ruler, the philosopher-king, would embody the qualities of reason, justice, and knowledge, providing a model for the people to emulate. Plato's proposal, though compelling in its idealism, presents challenges when applied to the complexities of modern governance. The philosopher-king, according to Plato, would be an individual who has undergone years of rigorous education and training, gaining knowledge of the forms, abstract, perfect ideals that exist beyond the physical world. This knowledge would equip the philosopher-king to rule justly and wisely, for the good of all citizens. For Plato, the ideal state is not a democracy, where power is often in the hands of the ignorant masses, but rather an oligarchy of philosopher-kings, rulers who understand the deeper truths of existence. The philosopher-king's role is not to exploit power or serve personal interests, but to ensure that each individual in society fulfills their rightful role in a just and harmonious order. While Plato's ideal state may seem authoritarian by modern standards, the underlying principle remains significant: the need for wise and virtuous leadership. In today's world, we often find ourselves governed by leaders who may not possess the intellectual and moral rigor that Plato envisioned. Leaders are frequently selected based on their charisma, popularity, or media presence rather than their ability to lead with wisdom and justice. In this sense, Plato's ideal of the philosopher-king seems increasingly difficult to realize, as the political landscape today is shaped more by personality and popularity than by a true commitment to intellectual and ethical excellence. However, the core of Plato's argument that leadership should be grounded in wisdom remains relevant. The contrast between wisdom-driven leadership and the often populist, media-centric politics of today raises important questions about what qualities should define a good leader. A contemporary example of this tension can be seen when comparing Plato's philosopher-king to modern political figures like Angela Merkel. Merkel, often praised for her steady, pragmatic leadership during crises such as the European debt crisis and the migrant crisis, exemplifies some aspects of Plato's ideal ruler. Merkel's background as a trained physicist, combined with her cautious, reasoned approach to politics, mirrors Plato's notion of a leader who approaches governance with intellectual depth and deliberation. In contrast, Donald Trump's rise to power highlights the dangers of the charismatic populist leader. Trump's appeal was not based on a deep intellectual understanding of policy, but rather on his ability to connect with the emotions and frustrations of voters, using media and rhetoric to rally support. This contrast between Merkel's reasoned leadership and Trump's populist approach illustrates the difficulty of achieving Plato's ideal in a democracy that prioritizes popularity and emotional appeal over wisdom and rational discourse. While Plato's ideal state is centered on the philosopher-king, his critique of democracy is just as critical to understanding his views on governance. Plato had a profound disdain for democracy, which he saw as a system prone to disorder and instability. In his view, democracy inevitably leads to the rise of populist leaders who cater to the base desires of the masses, pandering to their emotions rather than making reasoned decisions for the good of society. Plato believed that when the masses have the power to choose their leaders, they often elect demagogues who promise to satisfy their immediate desires without regard for the long-term well-being of the state. This leads to a cycle of chaos and corruption, with rulers who are motivated by their own self-interest and a populace that is easily manipulated. Plato's critique of democracy seems remarkably prescient in light of contemporary political trends, particularly the rise of populism around the world. Populist movements often prioritize the immediate emotional desires of the people, whether it's promises of economic prosperity, nationalistic rhetoric, or anti-establishment sentiments, over rational discourse and long-term policy solutions. In the case of leaders like Boris Johnson in the UK or Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, we see populist leaders who exploit the frustrations of the masses, using simplistic solutions and emotive language to rally support. These leaders, like the demagogues Plato warned against, often reject the expertise of educated elites and pursue policies based on popular appeal rather than careful consideration of the long-term consequences. For Plato, such leaders are the natural result of a democracy that places too much power in the hands of the uninformed public. However, Plato's critique of democracy is not without its challenges. In modern times, democratic systems have evolved to allow for accountability and more direct participation from the people. While democracies may not always lead to the selection of philosopher-kings, they do allow for the possibility of change and reform. One of the strengths of democracy is its ability to correct course when leaders make mistakes or abuse their power. The democratic process provides a mechanism for public accountability, allowing citizens to vote leaders out of office if they fail to live up to expectations. While this may not always result in the election of the wisest leaders, it does provide a system of checks and balances that Plato's ideal state lacked. In addition, democracy allows for a more pluralistic society, where different views and interests can be represented in the political sphere. In Plato's ideal state, the roles of citizens are rigidly defined, with each individual assigned to one of three classes: rulers, warriors, or producers. This stratification may seem undemocratic to modern sensibilities, where equality and individual freedom are valued. Democracy, in contrast, gives people the freedom to pursue their own interests, regardless of their social status, and allows for the representation of diverse voices. While this can lead to disorder or inefficiency, it also ensures that no single group holds all the power. Barack Obama's presidency, for instance, is a case where democracy allowed for the election of a leader who was not only popular but also intellectually gifted. Obama's rise to power, based on a platform of hope and change, exemplifies the potential of democratic systems to bring wise leadership to the forefront. However, his tenure also highlighted the challenges of governing in a deeply divided society, where popular sentiments can clash with rational policymaking. Obama's experience underscores the tension between wisdom and populism that Plato warned about, as his efforts to promote long-term policies were often stymied by the demands of an emotionally charged electorate. Despite Plato's critique of democracy, his views on the importance of knowledge and wisdom in governance continue to resonate. In an age of populism, Plato's ideas provide a stark reminder of the dangers of electing leaders based on charisma and emotional appeal rather than intellect and virtue. His ideal of the philosopher-king serves as an aspirational model, urging us to strive for a political system that values wisdom, justice, and the greater good over the short-term desires of the electorate. While Plato's vision may seem unrealistic or authoritarian in the modern context, his emphasis on the importance of reasoned leadership remains a powerful reminder of the need for leaders who understand the complexities of human society and are committed to making decisions that benefit the long-term health of the state. Plato's critique of democracy also raises important questions about modern governance. Is it possible to balance the wisdom of philosopher-kings with the democratic ideals of equality and participation? Can modern societies find ways to elect leaders who possess both intellectual rigor and the ability to connect with the people? These questions continue to shape political discourse today. As we grapple with the complexities of leadership, democracy, and governance in an increasingly divided and polarized world, Plato's views on knowledge and truth are foundational to his entire philosophical system, and his theory of the forms stands at the heart of his thought. To understand Plato's views on knowledge, it's essential to grasp his distinction between the physical world and the world of forms. According to Plato, the physical world, the one we perceive through our senses, is a realm of constant change, imperfection, and illusion. It is a world of shadows, a mere reflection of a higher, more perfect reality. This perfect reality, which Plato called the world of forms, consists of immutable, eternal ideals or archetypes that transcend the physical realm. True knowledge, for Plato, is not knowledge of the material world, but knowledge of these forms, which represent the true essence of all things. In his famous allegory of the cave, Plato illustrated this idea by describing prisoners chained in a dark cave, facing a wall. The only reality they know is the shadows cast on the wall by objects behind them. These shadows, however, are mere imitations of the real objects, which the prisoners can never see. Plato suggests that most people live like these prisoners, perceiving only the imperfect shadows of true reality. True knowledge, he argues, comes when one breaks free of these chains and ascends to the light, seeing the world of forms and contemplating the eternal truths that underlie all things. For Plato, the physical world is not the ultimate source of knowledge. Instead, knowledge comes from contemplating the forms, which exist beyond time and space and represent the ideal versions of everything: goodness, beauty, justice, and so on. The physical world, according to Plato, is merely an imperfect copy or reflection of these perfect forms. To use an analogy, Plato's idea is similar to an artist's vision of their masterpiece before the actual execution. The artist first forms a mental picture of the perfect creation, and only then does the physical work begin. The work of art that emerges is a mere approximation of the artist's initial vision. In the same way, the physical world we see around us is a reflection of the higher, unchanging forms. This theory of forms raises profound questions about perception and reality. The notion that knowledge is not derived from the sensory experience, but from intellectual contemplation challenges how we typically think about the world. In modern times, this can be compared to the way we think about ideal concepts versus their real-world manifestations. Take, for example, the concept of justice. In the physical world, justice can take many forms, but it is always imperfect, subject to human error and bias. Plato would argue that the true form of justice exists independently of human actions, as a perfect and eternal ideal. Only by contemplating this form can one hope to understand what justice truly means. Plato's theory of knowledge extends to his views on education and the role of intellectual institutions. He believed that education was the key to understanding the world of forms and, ultimately, to discovering the truth. Plato's commitment to education as a process of intellectual ascent is evident in the creation of his academy, the first institution of higher learning in the Western world. The academy became a model for future universities and intellectual institutions, and its legacy continues today. In Plato's vision, education was not merely about acquiring practical skills or knowledge for survival in the world. Instead, it was a holistic process aimed at cultivating the soul and preparing the individual for the contemplation of higher truths. The academy was a space for rigorous intellectual inquiry, where students could engage with complex philosophical problems and debate the nature of reality, justice, knowledge, and the good. Education, for Plato, was about guiding individuals toward a deeper understanding of the world of forms and helping them achieve a state of intellectual and moral excellence. This focus on intellectual rigor and the search for truth is something that we continue to value in modern universities and academic institutions. Just as Plato's academy encouraged students to question assumptions and seek the highest truths, today's universities are places where individuals are encouraged to pursue knowledge, challenge established norms, and engage with complex ideas. Modern academic institutions, whether they are in philosophy, the sciences, or the humanities, are grounded in the belief that intellectual inquiry is not only valuable but necessary for the advancement of society. One of the enduring lessons of Plato's academy is the importance of fostering an environment where ideas can be freely exchanged and critically examined. Just as Plato's students were encouraged to engage in rigorous philosophical dialogue, modern education emphasizes the importance of critical thinking and the search for truth. For example, in today's world, many students pursue philosophy not simply to understand ancient texts, but to grapple with fundamental questions about ethics, knowledge, and the nature of reality. The academy, as Plato conceived it, serves as a prototype for this kind of intellectual environment, where the goal is not just to accumulate knowledge, but to understand the underlying principles that govern the world. Aristotle, Plato's most famous student, would eventually diverge from his teacher's theory of forms, emphasizing instead the importance of empirical observation and practical experience. However, the foundational impact of Plato's academy on the development of Western philosophy cannot be overstated. It was in this intellectual space that the tradition of systematic inquiry into the nature of reality, ethics, and politics took root, shaping the intellectual framework of the Western world for centuries to come. In modern times, the role of higher education continues to evolve, but the core value of Plato's vision, an emphasis on cultivating minds that seek truth, remains as relevant as ever. Plato's insistence that education should be about more than vocational training is something we still see in today's universities, where students are encouraged to think deeply, question assumptions, and engage with big ideas. For instance, the prestigious universities like Harvard, Oxford, and Stanford continue to foster a culture of intellectual curiosity and critical thinking, emphasizing not just practical skills but the broader pursuit of knowledge for its own sake. These institutions reflect Plato's belief that the true purpose of education is to cultivate wisdom and prepare individuals to engage with the deepest questions of existence. In the realm of politics, Plato's views on knowledge and governance are still felt. The role of philosophers and intellectuals in shaping political discourse remains a key feature of democratic societies. While Plato may have imagined philosopher-kings as the ideal rulers, the contemporary idea of intellectuals and experts influencing public policy is a reflection of his belief in the value of knowledge and reason in governance. Figures like Barack Obama, who was a constitutional scholar before entering politics, exemplify the modern ideal of a leader with a deep intellectual background. Obama's emphasis on evidence-based decision-making and the importance of reason in policymaking resonates with Plato's vision of leaders who are guided by knowledge rather than passion or populism. Yet, Plato's belief in the distinction between the world of forms and the material world challenges modern views of knowledge. In an age dominated by empirical science, we often value knowledge gained through experience and observation. Plato's insistence on the higher, ideal realm can seem distant from the more pragmatic approach to knowledge that we take today. Nevertheless, Plato's insistence that knowledge is a process of discovering eternal truths rather than merely accumulating facts is a reminder that true understanding requires more than just sensory perception. It requires an ability to think critically, ask profound questions, and recognize the limits of the material world. The contrast between Plato's idealism and modern empirical approaches highlights an ongoing debate in philosophy and science. whether knowledge is best gained through intellectual reflection or through empirical observation of the physical world. Plato's theory of knowledge, while seeming abstract, still provides a valuable framework for understanding the deeper dimensions of human experience and the pursuit of truth. Today, as we engage in a world increasingly dominated by technology and data-driven decision-making, Plato's call for intellectual depth and the search for eternal truths serves as a reminder of the importance of fostering wisdom, not just practical knowledge. The challenge, of course, is reconciling Plato's vision with the realities of the modern world, where the pursuit of truth often seems secondary to the demands of immediate results and practical outcomes. Yet, Plato's legacy endures, and his views on knowledge continue to inspire those who seek to understand not just the world around them, but the deeper, more abstract principles that govern existence. Plato's influence has reverberated through centuries, and his ideas remain just as relevant today as they were in ancient Greece. His thoughts on politics, knowledge, justice, and morality have shaped not only Western philosophy but also modern governance, personal ethics, and even our understanding of the self. When we delve into the complex web of his theories, it becomes clear that Plato's philosophical ideas are not relics of the past, but still offer profound insights into the modern world. His impact is not only historical, but also deeply personal, inviting individuals to reflect on their own lives, their decisions, and their place in society. Plato's philosophy is particularly striking because of how it bridges the gap between ancient thought and contemporary issues. In the realm of justice, for instance, his vision of an ideal society governed by philosopher-kings is still a point of reference for modern debates on leadership and governance. The idea of a ruler possessing wisdom and knowledge, as opposed to one who seeks power for its own sake, is an enduring aspiration. However, this notion can be challenging when applied to today's world of complex political realities. The political landscape, for instance, is often dominated by charismatic leaders who rise to power not necessarily because of their wisdom, but due to their ability to connect with the masses, manipulate public opinion, or make populist promises. One of the most striking examples of this tension between Plato's ideal and the reality of modern politics can be found in the rise of populist leaders around the world. Figures like Donald Trump, Viktor Orban, or Jair Bolsonaro have used populism as a tool to gain and maintain power, often appealing to emotions and desires rather than reason and long-term wisdom. Plato, in his critique of democracy, would have likely seen such leaders as dangerous, for he believed that democracy too easily gave way to demagogues who pandered to the desires of the people, leading to instability and the erosion of reasoned decision-making. Plato's concern was not just the form of government, but the character of its leaders, and how easily a society can descend into chaos when rulers lack virtue. In contrast, Plato's philosopher-king is an ideal ruler who seeks not personal gain but the common good, guided by reason and wisdom. This ideal might seem utopian in today's complex, fast-paced world, but the concept still challenges us to think about what kind of leaders we want. Are we willing to accept leaders who are charismatic but lack substantive knowledge? Or do we place greater value on the intellectual rigor and moral character that Plato championed? These are questions that remain deeply relevant in discussions of political leadership today. When reflecting on Plato's theory of knowledge and truth, we see another area where his ideas provide a powerful lens through which to view modern life. Plato's distinction between the world of the senses and the world of the forms is a call to look beyond the surface, to seek deeper truths and avoid the distractions of the material world. In today's society, where information is constantly bombarded upon us through digital media and the internet, Plato's teachings serve as a reminder of the importance of intellectual depth and critical thinking. We are often overwhelmed by the sheer volume of superficial information, news stories, viral posts, tweets, and advertisements, each vying for our attention. The challenge, as Plato would see it, is distinguishing between what is true and what is merely an illusion or a reflection of something deeper. This idea of deeper truths also relates to the current debates about knowledge and reality in fields such as artificial intelligence and virtual reality. Plato's insistence that true knowledge cannot come from the senses but from the contemplation of eternal forms resonates with contemporary questions about what constitutes real knowledge and how we should navigate a world increasingly dominated by digital representations and simulations. Just as Plato's prisoners in the cave are tricked into thinking the shadows on the wall are the whole of reality, we might ask ourselves whether we, too, are being deceived by the superficial layers of our digitally mediated lives. This question of knowledge and truth intersects directly with the role of education in the modern world. In today's globalized society, education is often seen as a means to an economic end, to prepare individuals for jobs and careers in an increasingly competitive marketplace. But Plato's vision of education as a way to cultivate wisdom and intellectual virtue challenges us to think about education more broadly. What is the true purpose of education in our time? Is it only to prepare people for work? Or should it also aim to cultivate critical thinkers who are capable of engaging with the big questions of life, ethics, and existence? As we move through the complexities of modern life, I often reflect on Plato's tripartite theory of the soul, the division of the soul into reason, spirit, and appetite, and its relevance to my own experiences. This model has been an insightful tool for understanding moments of internal conflict, when I feel torn between competing desires, whether it's the immediate satisfaction of indulgence or the long-term fulfillment of rational goals. I recall Plato's view that a well-balanced soul is one in which reason governs the other parts. It's a framework that encourages self-reflection, reminding us that our desires and emotions, though powerful, should not rule our actions. This idea has been profoundly influential in my own decision-making, particularly in times when I feel overwhelmed by conflicting impulses. Plato's philosophy invites us to slow down, reflect, and strive to bring reason and harmony to our lives. This reflection is particularly important in the context of modern consumer culture, where the constant bombardment of advertisements and media often appeals directly to our appetites, seeking to satisfy immediate desires without consideration for long-term well-being. Plato's philosophy provides a counterbalance to this, urging us to cultivate reason and self-control in the face of external pressures. In doing so, we can aspire not only to personal peace, but also to contribute to the creation of a more just and balanced society, where the soul's true harmony is reflected in the world around us. Moreover, when considering Plato's thoughts on the soul and immortality, his belief in the soul's eternal nature offers both hope and moral direction. Plato's vision of the soul's immortality and its cyclical nature, where life comes from death and vice versa, provides a framework for understanding human actions in a larger, cosmic context. In contemporary society, this notion resonates with modern concepts of legacy and moral responsibility. Many people today strive to leave behind something lasting, whether in the form of material wealth, social influence, or intellectual achievements. The pursuit of legacy, however, often stems from a desire for immortality, not in the literal sense of the soul's continuation, but in the sense of being remembered and celebrated. Plato's philosophy takes this a step further by emphasizing that the quality of our actions, grounded in wisdom and virtue, determines the fate of our soul. If we see our lives as part of a greater moral narrative, we might make decisions that align more closely with the long-term well-being of others, rather than being consumed with short-term pleasures or ambitions. On a personal level, reflecting on Plato's emphasis on justice, both within the soul and in society, reminds us that true justice is not about rigidly adhering to laws or rules, but about ensuring that each part of the soul, and by extension, each part of society, performs its appropriate function. Just as Plato's ideal state relies on the harmonious relationship between rulers, warriors, and producers, the individual soul must also be in harmony, with reason guiding spirit and appetite. In contemporary society, this idea of internal justice can inform our approach to personal ethics. It challenges us to evaluate our own lives and our relationship with desire, ambition, and reason, to consider whether we are striving for a balance that fosters not just individual flourishing but also social harmony. In conclusion, Plato's ideas continue to resonate deeply in the modern world, offering both a blueprint for political thought and a moral compass for personal reflection. Whether we are considering the role of leaders in our political systems, the way we educate future generations, or the nature of our individual desires, Plato's insights challenge us to think critically and to strive for greater wisdom and justice. His ideas transcend the ancient world, providing timeless guidance on how to live a virtuous life, make wise decisions, and contribute to the greater good of society. Plato's philosophy, particularly his vision of the philosopher-king and his notions of justice, wisdom, and governance, continues to find resonance in the real world. When considering the application of these ideas in modern society, it is useful to look at historical and contemporary figures whose actions seem to reflect the ideals that Plato articulated over 2 millennia ago. One such figure is Nelson Mandela, whose leadership and philosophy embodied many of the principles that Plato described as necessary for a just and harmonious society. Nelson Mandela, who became the first Black president of South Africa after decades of apartheid, provides a powerful example of how a leader can navigate the complex interplay of reason, spirit, and appetite. Plato's idea of the philosopher-king is rooted in the belief that the ruler must be someone who possesses not just political savvy, but deep wisdom, moral integrity, and a capacity for understanding the needs of the entire society. Mandela, in many ways, fit this description. He demonstrated a level of wisdom that transcended simple political calculation, choosing to embrace reconciliation rather than revenge after his release from prison. Despite the years of injustice and suffering he had endured, Mandela's leadership was shaped by reason, the ability to discern the best course of action for the long-term good of the nation, rather than yielding to the spirit of anger and vengeance that might have driven others in his position. In Plato's model, the philosopher-king does not rule based on emotional impulses, but by a commitment to reason and justice. Mandela's decision to pursue national reconciliation, to embrace his former oppressors, and build a democratic society grounded in equality, directly mirrors this idea of a ruler guided by wisdom and reason. His moral courage in making decisions that were not always popular, especially when he chose forgiveness over retribution, shows that the true test of leadership is not in wielding power for its own sake, but in using it to guide society toward fairness and unity. Mandela's commitment to a just society and his ability to keep the broader interests of South Africa at heart mirrored the role of Plato's philosopher-king, whose ultimate goal is not to perpetuate power but to shape a society where harmony prevails. Plato's ideal state is not a place of endless conflict or division, but one in which the roles of individuals, rulers, warriors, producers, are balanced, and each contributes to the whole. Mandela understood that in order to dismantle the deeply entrenched systems of racial inequality, a holistic approach was needed, one that incorporated the wisdom of forgiveness and the long-term benefits of unity, rather than focusing solely on immediate retribution. His ability to embody Plato's concept of the philosopher-king allowed him to transcend personal grievances and work towards a greater good that prioritized justice, peace, and reconciliation. The lessons we can draw from Mandela's example are manifold. First, it is clear that leadership, in the context of Plato's philosophy, requires wisdom and self-control. Leaders must be able to rise above the emotional impulses of anger, resentment, or personal gain and focus instead on what is best for the society they are meant to serve. In Mandela's case, he did not succumb to the desire for revenge, which would have been a natural response after spending 27 years in prison under a racist regime. Instead, he demonstrated the moral fortitude that Plato would have admired, the ability to govern with justice and reason, always keeping the welfare of the nation in mind. Secondly, Mandela's leadership also exemplifies the role of spirit in Plato's tripartite model of the soul. While reason is essential, spirit, the emotional and moral energy that drives us toward justice, must also play a critical role. Mandela's unshakable resolve to end apartheid was fueled by a deep moral vision, one that sought to reconcile and unify rather than divide. His spirit was not one of vengeance, but of moral commitment to a higher cause. The power of spirit, when aligned with reason, becomes a potent force for positive change in society. Mandela's leadership demonstrates that true justice is not achieved solely through rational discourse. It is also driven by a deep sense of moral responsibility. Another striking real-life example of Plato's ideas can be found in the leadership of Barack Obama, the 44th President of the United States. While Obama did not face the same kind of systemic injustice that Mandela did, his presidency was marked by moments where he had to navigate the competing pressures of reason, spirit, and appetite in the pursuit of justice. Like Plato's philosopher-king, Obama was often faced with difficult choices that required balancing his intellectual understanding of the political landscape with his emotional commitments to justice and equality. For example, Obama's decision to support the Affordable Care Act, a landmark healthcare reform, required him to balance political strategy with his moral vision of providing universal healthcare. His ability to stay focused on long-term goals, even when faced with significant opposition, reflected Plato's idea of governance as being guided by a higher understanding of what is best for the society as a whole. Obama's rhetoric often appealed to reason, as he sought to engage Americans in a dialogue about the importance of justice and equality in a democratic society. He was not a populist leader who pandered to the immediate desires of the masses, but rather one who sought to elevate the conversation around difficult issues, like healthcare, climate change, and racial inequality, with reason and thoughtful deliberation. In this sense, Obama's leadership echoes Plato's philosopher-king, who rules not based on popular opinion or personal desires, but on wisdom and the pursuit of justice. Obama's focus on long-term change, especially in the context of healthcare reform, exemplifies the Platonic ideal of a ruler whose actions are not driven by short-term gains, but by a deep understanding of what is best for society in the long run. However, Plato's critique of democracy, and his belief that democracy can easily devolve into populism, is also worth considering in the context of Obama's presidency. While Obama himself was a thoughtful and measured leader, his tenure was also marked by a rise in populist sentiment, particularly during and after the 2016 election. Figures like Donald Trump capitalized on the populist mood of the moment, appealing to the emotional and visceral desires of a segment of the population, while often disregarding reasoned discourse. Plato's concerns about the dangers of democracy, where leaders may prioritize popular opinion over wisdom and reason, were vividly illustrated in the rise of Trump and other populist figures, who often ignored the more measured, intellectual approach that Obama advocated. This contrast between Obama and Trump is particularly poignant when viewed through the lens of Plato's philosophy. Obama, in many ways, embodied the philosopher-king, trying to steer the nation through reason and moral commitment to justice. Trump, on the other hand, often embraced the emotional appeal of populism, using charisma and inflammatory rhetoric to galvanize support, even at the cost of deeper, more meaningful political discourse. Plato's vision of a ruler who seeks not personal glory but the good of the whole society is at odds with the kind of leadership that thrives on division, manipulation, and emotional appeal. The tension between these two styles of leadership serves as a reminder of the dangers Plato foresaw in democracies, and how important it is for leaders to be driven by wisdom, compassion, and a sense of justice, rather than the fleeting desires of the moment. In examining these modern leaders through the lens of Plato's philosophy, we are reminded that the true measure of leadership is not just the ability to make decisions or win elections, but the ability to guide a society toward a more just, harmonious, and wise future. Mandela's example shows us that leadership requires a delicate balance of reason, spirit, and self-control. Obama's leadership reflects the importance of governing with wisdom and compassion, especially in the face of challenges. Both figures demonstrate the power of Plato's philosopher-king ideal, leaders who govern not for personal gain, but for the greater good of society. Ultimately, these lessons provide us with valuable insights into how we can approach leadership, governance, and personal morality in our own lives. Whether in politics, business, or our personal relationships, Plato's ideas urge us to reflect on the deeper truths that guide our actions, to seek wisdom, and to strive for a balance between reason, spirit, and desire that will lead to a more just and harmonious world. Plato's philosophy, developed more than 2,000 years ago, has an extraordinary and lasting impact on how we think about justice, governance, morality, and the nature of the soul. While the world has changed dramatically since Plato's time, the questions he raised continue to resonate deeply in modern society. His exploration of the ideal state, his emphasis on the harmony of the soul, and his theories on knowledge and truth continue to shape our discussions on ethics, politics, and personal conduct. Through the lens of Plato's philosophy, we are invited to reflect on not only the structures of governance and society, but also the nature of our own souls and the decisions that guide our lives. Plato's concept of the soul, divided into reason, spirit, and appetite, offers a framework for understanding our inner conflicts and personal morality. The idea that reason should govern our desires and impulses is not just an ancient theory but a timeless call for self-control and rational decision-making. Today, leaders like Nelson Mandela, Barack Obama, and others embody aspects of Plato's philosopher-king, demonstrating the importance of wisdom, compassion, and self-restraint in positions of power. Just as Plato envisioned rulers who would govern based on reason and virtue, these leaders have shown that true leadership requires a balance of intellect, moral integrity, and empathy, not just charisma or popularity. Moreover, Plato's critique of democracy, particularly his warning about the dangers of populism, is strikingly relevant in our own political climate. Plato warned that democracy could easily devolve into a system where leaders pander to the masses, prioritizing popular sentiment over reasoned discourse and long-term stability. Today, we see these concerns manifest in the rise of populist movements around the world. Figures like Donald Trump have exploited the emotional currents of the masses, often disregarding reason and fostering division rather than unity. In contrast, Plato's ideal state calls for rulers who seek the truth and prioritize the well-being of society, not the whims of the people. Plato's theory of forms, his belief that true knowledge comes from contemplating the eternal and unchanging forms rather than the transient physical world, offers a profound insight into the nature of truth. In the world of politics, this can be understood as a call for leaders to strive for deeper wisdom, not just practical knowledge. The philosopher-king in Plato's ideal state is not only knowledgeable in the material world, but also possesses insight into the ultimate truths that govern all things. In modern terms, this means that our leaders should not merely be skilled politicians or successful businessmen, but individuals who deeply understand the philosophical underpinnings of justice, morality, and the common good. Another critical aspect of Plato's philosophy that resonates today is his vision of education. Plato's establishment of the academy and his emphasis on intellectual inquiry laid the groundwork for the higher education systems that we value today. The pursuit of knowledge, not just for personal gain but for the betterment of society, is a central tenet of Plato's thought. In the modern world, universities continue to be spaces where the best minds come together to ask big questions and challenge conventional wisdom. In a world increasingly driven by market forces, the value of education for the sake of knowledge and moral development remains as relevant as ever. Plato's emphasis on intellectual rigor encourages us to seek truth, not for personal benefit, but to contribute to the greater good. Reflecting on the teachings of Plato, it becomes clear that his philosophy isn't just a relic of the past but a framework for understanding the complexities of modern life. Whether in politics, business, or personal relationships, his ideas about justice, knowledge, and leadership provide valuable lessons. Plato's philosopher-king, with their blend of wisdom, self-control, and moral integrity, serves as a model for what we should strive for in our leaders, as well as in ourselves. While Plato's ideal state may seem distant and unattainable, his philosophical inquiries challenge us to examine the ways in which we govern our own lives and make decisions for the greater good. One of the most powerful lessons from Plato's work is the idea that our actions today have consequences not only for our immediate future but for our eternal soul. Plato's belief in the immortality of the soul and his assertion that our lives on earth influence our spiritual fate offers a moral framework that encourages us to live virtuously. In modern terms, we often speak about leaving a legacy. Our actions today shape how we are remembered after we die. Plato takes this a step further, suggesting that our actions are not just about how we are remembered by others, but how they shape our soul's destiny in the eternal realm. This perspective encourages us to live with a sense of purpose, guided by reason and virtue, knowing that our choices matter on a deeper, spiritual level. For anyone seeking to live a more just and harmonious life, Plato's philosophy offers a challenge. It asks us to cultivate our souls, to ensure that reason governs our desires and impulses, and to use our intellect to discern the truth in all matters. It also encourages us to examine the structures of our societies, whether they be political systems, institutions, or businesses, to ensure they are governed by wisdom, justice, and the pursuit of the common good. Plato's ideas remind us that true leadership is not about seeking power for its own sake, but about guiding others towards a more just and virtuous existence. Reflecting on Plato's legacy, I find that his philosophy continues to influence my own thinking. His insights into the nature of the soul and the role of reason in governing our lives resonate with me in my personal journey. Plato's tripartite theory of the soul, for instance, is a framework I often return to when I feel conflicted. It reminds me that when my desires or emotions are in conflict with my rational mind, I must strive to bring them into harmony. This, for me, is not only a philosophical ideal but a practical guide for living a more balanced and meaningful life. Similarly, Plato's ideas about justice and governance have shaped how I think about leadership. In both my professional and personal life, I try to make decisions based on wisdom and integrity, not on emotional impulses or the desire for immediate gratification. This doesn't mean I am always successful, but it provides a clear moral compass for navigating complex decisions. Plato's emphasis on the philosopher-king reminds me that leadership is not about popularity or charisma, but about the ability to guide others with reason and virtue. Ultimately, Plato's vision of a just life is not an abstract dream but a challenge to our everyday decisions and the society we build. It encourages us to reflect on our own choices, both as individuals and as members of larger communities, and to ensure that our actions are aligned with the pursuit of truth and justice. In many ways, his legacy serves as a mirror, inviting us to examine both our individual paths and the collective trajectory of the societies we live in. Living virtuously, according to Plato, is not just about outward actions but about cultivating the soul, aligning our reason, spirit, and appetite in pursuit of a higher moral good. It is a timeless journey toward personal and collective harmony, one that requires continuous reflection, self-discipline, and a commitment to the well-being of all. As we've explored, Plato's timeless philosophy continues to offer profound insights into how we live, lead, and govern, lessons that are as relevant today as they were over 2,000 years ago. From the harmony of the soul to the role of wisdom in leadership, Plato's ideas challenge us to strive for a more virtuous, just, and thoughtful existence, whether you're grappling with personal choices or reflecting on the state of the world. His philosophy provides a compass for navigating life's complexities. If you found these insights thought-provoking, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Every click helps spread the message of timeless wisdom, and we'd love to continue this journey together. Drop a comment below. What part of Plato's philosophy resonates most with you? Let's keep the conversation going. Thank you for watching. And remember, living a virtuous life isn't just about what we do in the world. It's about what we cultivate within our souls. See you in the next video.